Kia ora tātou, my name is Bernie Hawke. I'm the Group Manager Arts and Culture for the City Council, and it's my pleasure to welcome you tonight to this exhibition, Meet You in the Gardens. And it's a special exhibition that we've put together with over 60 items from our collection. That's including books, magazines, photographs and cartoons. And it's been specially curated to complement the 150th celebration of the Dunedin Botanic Gardens, of which we are extremely proud. Before I introduce our guest speaker this evening, Associate Professor Claire Freeman, I'd just like to acknowledge some of the people who've played a part in putting this exhibition together and making it all possible. I'd like to acknowledge Della Sunley. Della, do you want to stand up and wave? Della has been the lead curator, and I think it's been a labour of love gathering together all of these items which just showcase the gardens. And Della's been ably assisted by Cheryl Hanlon. So Cheryl's... Cheryl. It's been a real team effort for the Heritage Collections team, because Malcolm Deans, who I don't think Malcolm's here this evening. No. Malcolm photographed the exhibition, so an online exhibition will complement the physical exhibition. So if you enjoyed it a real lot tonight, you can go home soon. And
it's due to launch tomorrow.
Due to launch tomorrow, and maybe tomorrow have a linger on the screen with it. Casey Thomas from our council marketing team has done the graphic design, and as usual has done a fabulous job. So I'd encourage you to pick up one of the booklets that accompany the exhibition, which give you a list of all of the items and a little bit of background to it. So it's beautiful. And Kathleen McCarthy and the bindery team have done, as usual, a fabulous job carefully mounting and preserving all the items in the exhibition so that they don't deteriorate while on display. We'd also like to thank Alison Breeze and the team from the Dunedin City Council Archives for use of original photographs and plans, and also the Brook family for providing some of their family mementos for this exhibition. So that's really very much appreciated. We will, accompanying the exhibition next door, we will actually have a video running. The video is of the official 150th celebration, and it will be having the music from the Chills playing in the background. So if you sort of want a little bit of movement with the exhibition, you've definitely got it. So that's all from me. It's my great pleasure to introduce Claire. Claire is the Associate Professor at Otago University. She's the Director of the Master of Planning program at the university, and her professional experience includes a senior lectureship at Leeds Metropolitan University. She was Planning Coordinator of the Urban Wildlife Trust for the West Midlands in the UK, and was also a lecturer in the Geography Department at the University of North West South Africa. And Claire is the author of publications too numerous for me to mention, but they're all listed on the university website. So we're really pleased to be delighted to have Claire. Thank you very much.
Good evening, and thank you, Bernie, and thank you for inviting me here. It feels like a bit of a travesty out here, because I'm sure that lots of you know far more about Botanic Gardens than I do. However, I've been asked to talk, and I was wondering, why did they ask me to talk about the Botanic Gardens when we've probably got quite a few specialists, probably even in the audience. But there are two things I think that I can talk about the Botanic Gardens, and one is the fact that, like everyone here, we use them. We use them all the time. My family's grown up, and when they were teenagers, the Botanic Gardens was the one place where they would all willingly go. And I don't think any of you have had teenagers, but trying to get them to willingly go to places. But the Botanic Gardens, there's something about it. It may have been the crepes that was in the I don't know. But they would always willingly go, and I've had lots of Botanic Gardens experience. Like many people, my child has fallen in the duck pond and so on. But also what I've done is, as I wander around the world and I wander to different places, I always go to the parks and to the Botanic Gardens. And it fits in with my job. And my job is that I train planners. And one of the most important things in planning is to make our cities wonderful places to be. And one of the things that makes them wonderful places to be is the green space. And I've done quite a lot of work on green space, and I've looked at, over the years, I've looked at what is it that makes good green space? What is it that makes cities good? What is it that makes places where people can be happy that contribute to their well-being, and what are those physical features that make some cities work and other cities just plain miserable. And I've done a lot of work as well looking at children, and at the moment we're working on looking at children and nature in the city, and one of the things they talk about very, very much is parks. They haven't used the word botanic gardens yet, it might come up, but we're interviewing next week, for example, children in Auckland at Mount Roscoe, and we're asking them where do they go, what do they do, and what are the places that matter to them. And they always talk about the parks and the green spaces, and in New Zealand we're blessed with what we've got. So I've been asked to talk to you, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about where do botanic gardens fit in our view of the city. Why do we have gardens, parks and botanic gardens, and why is it that botanic gardens have stood the test of time? So our botanic garden here, it dates back now 150 years, and it's as successful today as it was when it was first started. What is it that makes it successful when we've got other things? And I almost thought of calling this, why is the Botanic Gardens not a paddock? We don't value paddocks, but a paddock is a natural place, really important to the New Zealand economy, but we'll happily build on it, we'll happily bulldoze it, but no one would ever build on or bulldoze this. What is it that makes Botanic Gardens special? What is it that makes all these people there? You don't see miserable people in the Botanic Gardens. You don't see couples arguing. You don't see parents getting upset with their children. But if you went into the Octagon, you'd probably see a lot of that. There's something about this that creates a happy atmosphere, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Okay, let's see if I can move this on. Perhaps I can't. I'll try this one then. No. Do you know how you move this on?
I might have to.
The normal button isn't working, sorry. Oh, hello. Let's see how I got it moving. You did. You certainly got it moving. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about 1860, and then I'm going to talk about now. What is it that was going on at the time of the Botanic Gardens that basically brought the Botanic Gardens into being and the green spaces into being? Now if we look at 1860, this is Princess Street. I mean, you've got lots of wonderful pictures here. I didn't even need to bring one, did I? This is 1860. This is about the time that the Botanic Gardens came into being. But isn't it amazing that in 1860, when there was such a lot of things that they had to do in Dunedin, that they put aside the Botanic Gardens, they put aside the parks. And that is phenomenal, because they were struggling with health, with poverty, with separation, a lot of the settlers from where they come from, and yet they found the time and the energy for the Botanic Gardens. So I think that's quite amazing. But what else was going on in 1860 in terms of our green space? What sorts of other things were happening? And let's have a look outside New Zealand. So what are the influences that were influencing New Zealand and influencing New Zealanders to put all the effort into a Botanic Gardens? So if we look at other green spaces, this was going on. Well, clearly that wasn't going on in 1860, but we had green spaces starting to be built. In London we had the parks. A lot of the parks have been there, but if you look at London, particularly from there, you see the radiating out from Buckingham Palace, these very small formal avenues divided by parks. Parks started to be used as indications of grandeur and power. And so whoever was in Buckingham Palace at the time, it was actually only built, I think, late 1700s, early 1800s. It's quite a recent building. But the avenue was there as an expression of grandeur and power. But we also started to get green space with the trees here and the St James's Park, Hyde Park, all those parks being used as an indication of how powerful these royal persons were. And we got it in France as well, in Paris. They raised a lot of Paris so that Napoleon had these grand avenues to march his armies down to show how powerful he was. This was John Nash. So grandeur and power were important in green space. And we see this here. Queen Victoria, I don't think anyone's seen this, it's utterly amazing. It's gold, I don't know if it's real gold, but it certainly looks like gold. And this is Albert, the beloved of Queen Victoria. And the parks were almost like the royals' own back garden
to do with as they want and to erect these most amazing sculptures. So parks were about royalty, they were about grandeur, they weren't for the ordinary people at that time. Green space and gardens were again about royalty, it was about the rich, the aristocrats had their own private gardens. Normal people like me and you wouldn't have had gardens. This is outside Kensington Palace, it was taken last year. This is now open to the public, but originally it wouldn't have been. So there was this concept of urban green space was private, it wasn't for everybody. If we look in the squares of London, what we had these sorts of parks, but there's a fence around them, and they were only available to the people who immediately lived around the park. And you entered, I don't know if you entered by a key, but certainly it wasn't there for everyone. Hugh Grant in one of his films actually tried to climb over the fence to get into one. Which film's that? Notting Hill. That's right. Because they're private, they're not public space. So it was very much green space was for the wealthy. The poor had spaces, and this is Clapham Common. Obviously, it didn't look like that then, but these were on the edge of the city, and they were places for grazing of animals, and they'd been encapsulated. We start to get the idea that you can have green space for the general public. Okay, so we had the Clapham Common, we had Wimbledon Common, we had Hampstead Heath, those sorts of places. So these were the things that were familiar to the settlers and familiar to those who were designing Dunedin and designing our cities. But the reality of life was pretty grim for most people. This is what a lot of the settlers were trying to escape. A lack of green space, a lack of healthy living, pretty dire and very, very poor conditions. We started to get in the 1875, we got the first of the Health Acts, and that led to my profession. The Health Act started to stipulate what sort of living conditions you would have in the urban areas. And they started to be worried, not just about the well-being of the people, but the well-being of their employers, because if they had noxious diseases and spreadable diseases, they would spread to their employers. So it didn't matter if you were rich, you would still get the disease. So it was about making the urban areas better for everyone. It was also about concerns about the moral well-being of society. And this influenced the green space, this idea of you can't have people with high morals living in these sorts of conditions. It's not conducive to it. So there was concern about the moral fibre. This came out with someone, I thought that you might like this one. This was George Cadbury. And you got some people called Victorian philanthropists. I'm not sure if they were philanthropists, but these were industrial factory owners. And one of them was George Cadbury. Others were the Lever brothers. Port Sunlight was another one. And what they did was they saw the conditions that their workers were living in, and they designed model villages with good conditioned houses, so that, well, for one thing, so they didn't spread disease to themselves and their own families, but also if your workers aren't dying, it's actually better for the economy, because you're not having to retrain people all the time. So there's an economic benefit in having healthy workers. And they built some of these, and what it did was they provided gardens for workers. This was the first time they'd really thought about green space being important to people's health and for ordinary people. If anyone wants to ask anything, do stop me. So this is Birmingham, and this is now, and look at the quality of the houses that they're building. Absolutely fantastic. And they started to have parks and gardens. But parks were places where people can dress up. They can, see where they've got the long dress and the bustles and the top hats. It was a place you went to display your finery. You had park keepers, and they were to control what people did, to make sure they acted in an appropriate manner, to get rid of the riffraff, send the children away. I've got a wonderful photograph of the police chasing children at Woodhall Gardens. Were all, no, it's at Serpentine in London. They're all naked and they're getting them out of the water. And there's a similar photograph, but not in Cleveland at Woodhall Gardens, all naked little boys jumping in the water there, which wouldn't be allowed now. But anyway, so it was about good moral fibre and about presenting yourself in the best light, okay? So they weren't for the general public. They were mainly about middle class, well-to-do, or people who dressed up. There was a few movements going on. So there was the parks and gardens, but we started then for the first time to think, let's have parks and gardens as part of our urban fabric. And this is one of the most famous parks in the world. Do you recognise it? Yes, Central Park. But isn't it fantastic? And this was done by somebody called Frederick Law Olmsted. And he didn't just design this park, but he had in Boston the emerald necklace which went around the city. And if we think of this, 150, 160, 170 years later, some of the most expensive real estate in the world, and nobody's built on it. There started to be a recognition that these places were really valuable and really, really important. How many other bits of land from the 1870s have survived like this? Somehow they resonated with the consciousness of the people that these are really, really valuable places. We started to get botanic gardens, and this is Kew Gardens, which previously it had been a royal, part of a much larger royal estate, and then it became Kew Gardens in about the 1800s. And again we can see here people dressing up to go to the gardens, and if you go to Kew Gardens, I don't think anyone's been there, it looks exactly like that today. I went there I think 2 years ago, and it's virtually unchanged. So something about this resonated that we really value it, and we don't mess with it. We don't mess with our botanic gardens. But also it was about colonialism. It was about displaying the power of Britain or wherever it was, and bringing collections from all over the world from the colonies and having a place to display them. We also got botanic gardens in some of the colonies and around the world, and this is the Singapore Botanic Gardens, and I took this I think last year. I don't know if anyone's been there. It's utterly amazing. I think it's open from 8 in the morning to something like 11 at night every day of the week. And it was raining very heavily when I was there, and it was still packed with people, and the orchids are utterly fantastic. That was also started, I can't remember the date, I think it was about 1850. I'll just check how I got it. But certainly, oh, 1850, oh, it says 1859. So that's even before ours here. And again, this has stood the test of time. Amazing place. Something else was happening. We've got parks and gardens, but we're starting to think about what else do we have besides parks and gardens? What should the city look like in which these gardens are in? And we've got somebody called Ebenezer Howard, and he wrote a book in 1898 about garden cities. And I'll tell you why this in a minute, why this is important for New Zealand. And he was actually a nobody really knew anything about him. And then he came up with this book, and he suddenly became very, very famous. Everyone knows about him, but until then he had quite a low profile. And this is the sketch that he did of what he wanted towns and cities to look like. There would be a park in the middle, surrounded by houses, about 58,000 people, and then you'd have your satellite towns here. And he thought about everyone. He had a home for the inebriates, a home for the waifs, epileptic farms, an insane asylum here, convalescent homes. You see, he's put all the needs out in the green areas, so he clearly thinks that it's good being out in the countryside, and college for the blind. He's got all sorts of things here. But this is important because his movement influenced what happened. It became a reality, and it wasn't. Oftentimes maps are just on paper and never move from there. But this became reality, and we've got Welwyn Garden City designed on the principles, and this is Welwyn Garden City today. Parks and gardens up the middle, individual homes, and if you look, yesterday living and working in the smoke, today living in the suburbs and working in the smoke, and tomorrow living and working in the sun at Welwyn Garden City. And if we look at the early adverts for Mossgiel, which is about the 1920s, we also see adverts saying, come and live in sunny Mossgiel and get out of this smoke of Dunedin. The same idea was very present. And in New Zealand, the Garden City idea also took off. This is Palmerston North, Savage Crescent, also from about the 1920s, 1930s. And we can see it's almost identical. They're importing the ideas of Ebenezer Howard. And most of us live in houses that reflect Ebenezer Howard's ideal. It was quite
quite significant. So what was going on in New Zealand? And in New Zealand in 1919, they had something called the Town Planning Conference and Exhibition, 1919. And they had councillors there, engineers there. Even though they called it a planning exhibition, there was no planners there because the profession didn't exist at the time. All right? But it was called town planning. And the things that concerned them were that they didn't want the problems of the mother country, as they called it, coming over here. And I'll just read you a little bit from the 1919. It said, "It is our duty, thus early in its history, to endeavour, as far as possible, to avoid the mistakes which have been made by countries in the old lands of the world, especially in the mother country." And they talk about, they want to avoid the mean street which produces the mean men, the mean and tired women, and the unclean children. And one of the things they looked to avoid this meanness, was the garden city idea. And it also gave strength to our parks and our botanic gardens. And if we look at Wellington, this is 1880, we've got the town belt coming out here and the botanic gardens. It's not being eroded, the botanic gardens. Wellington spread all over, but it hasn't spread through the botanic gardens. There's something about the botanic gardens that was special and valued. If we look at Christchurch, originally it was planned with a town belt. I don't know if anyone knows more about it than that. I don't. But the town belt went, and all that we've got left are the trees on Beeley Avenue. Mind you, we haven't got a lot left on Beeley Avenue now, unfortunately. But the botanic gardens since 1877 here and Hagley Park again remain. And what we've got in New Zealand is parks and gardens being a fundamental part of the centre of our cities, and remaining so. If we look at Dunedin in 1872, we've got vast changes here on the waterfront, but we've got here the town belt here coming around, and we've got the reserve here. 1872, the identification of land to be reserved. This is the original Botanic Gardens. I'm sorry, it's a bit hard to read, but that says Botanic Gardens, and they eventually moved to here. All right.
Where the registry is now.
Yeah, where the registry is now at the university. But 1872, this land still remains, and Dunedin is one of the 3 cities that retains its town belt. Adelaide in Australia, Wellington and Dunedin. We've retained it, and the Botanic Gardens is an important part of that. So that's what we had in the 1860s, 100, 150 years ago, the start of the green. Not a lot happened since then. If we look at where are our major parks and gardens, the big parks in our cities, they all date back to the early 1900s or the late 1800s. There's virtually no big park been built since then. And we owe a great debt to the legacy of those very, very early surveyors and settlers and urban designers in what we've got today. Now what I want to do is just talk a little bit now about what is a function of the Botanic Gardens and the gardens and the parks today. Have they changed? Are they still what they were in 1860, or are they different? This is St James's Park, I think, or is it Hyde Park? St James's Park. If we look at that and we look at the image that we had of the people with their parasols wandering around, they are still meeting places. There are still places families go, people go to take time out from nature, to relax. They are still highly, highly successful places, and they're almost entirely intact. 150 years later, there will be very, very little change. The lake is still there, the paths are probably in the same place, the grass is probably in the same place. So they've stood the test of time in that respect. If we look at another park I've spent a lot of time in, Kings Park, we can see this idea, still the idea of a bit of grandeur in there, but we've got changes coming in. This is the typical park landscape that we've inherited from the 1800s, early 1900s. But things are happening, things are changing. We still have the formal, but we're now starting to have informal parks. And if you go to parts of Kings Park in Perth, we're now getting bushland restoration projects. We're now getting walks with kangaroo paw and some of the native plants of Australia in that particular park. And it's been so successful that when I
not last time, the time before I went, I was very near the road coming across from the ministries into King's Park, and a great big python, it must have been about 8 foot long, dropped out of a tree, not very far away. It was probably about where the last row is sitting away from me. So certainly, if you want to encourage your native wildlife, it's been highly successful. This wasn't what it was about in 1860, 1880, 1900. Then it was about showcasing the best in the world. It was about exotics. It wasn't about recognising and valuing what is in your own country. So that's quite a shift in mindset. But we also see it in Amsterdam. Well, Amsterdam bound to be in cycling. 5, even 10 years ago, this would have been mown grass. We're now recognising the value of nature, and we're not mowing the grass. We've got yarrow and wild plants growing here. That wouldn't have been seen. So there's a relaxation and a recognition that nature may have a role to play in these parts. However, Dunedin was way, way, way ahead of them. This is what's starting to happen now in Europe. But we've got Lovelock Bush, and is it Tannock who was responsible for this? I think at the Botanic Gardens. And I don't know whether he was prophetic in saving the bush and making the bush part of the Botanic Gardens, or whether they just never got around to modifying it. I don't know which one it was. Three of you might have an idea on that. But it's very, very unusual to see native bush and native habitat in a Botanic Gardens anywhere. I've just been to Kew Gardens last year, and they've now got signs up saying this is natural woodland which we are encouraging, because initially they got rid of it. They wanted it to be all very formal. The Botanic Gardens, now we see a change in it. This is a carcabeak, which is an endangered native species. The Botanic Gardens have always been important in supporting endangered species, whether it's from around the world or whether it's from local. But we see the change. The kaka, Mr. and Mrs. Roto from the Botanic Gardens, now are part of Orokonui Eco Sanctuary. I think they're flying free, and I'm not sure how successful they are at breeding, but we've now got a different attitude to particularly caging the animals. Somebody here was talking about the monkeys that they used to be when they were young at the Botanic Gardens. We wouldn't do that now, although we still cage macaws and parrots. But anyway, the native species is now part of a breeding unit at Orokonui Wildlife Sanctuary. So that's a really positive step. We've also got a relaxation of what we do and don't do in our parks and in Botanic Gardens. This is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. It's Lady Diana's memorial. It's like a river out of Cornish granite. And what they tried to do initially was they banned all the children. You don't do this and then say to children you can't go in it. But they did. And the children kept going back in it. So what they've done now is they've got a safety officer who stands there in a sort of day glow and watches the children just get stopped. But it's a fantastic thing. And we've got current debates going on about sculpture in the Botanic Gardens. Sculpture is a fundamental part of what Botanic Gardens is about. And this is a wonderful sculpture. We've also got being used for different purposes. This is a group of people in a park in central Perth doing Tai Chi. You wouldn't have got the Victorians when these parks were built doing Tai Chi. It was about displaying deportment. Now it's still the same sort of thing, being healthy, but perhaps health expressed in a little bit of a different way. We've also got recognition of diversity, recognition that these are for places for people of all ages, all abilities, all ethnicities, and Botanic Gardens, one of the things they do is bring people together. It doesn't matter where you're from in the world, what age you are, people feed the ducks. People appreciate the interaction with wildlife. These are native ducks, but a lot of them aren't. It doesn't matter, the people don't care. They don't care whether it's a mallard or a grey duck. They're all equally important. It's about having fun and coming back. So we're much more relaxed about what activities we do. We're relaxed about people lying on the grass, having picnics. And if somebody wants, they can even try and do back bends. And nobody bats an eyelid. But in the 1860s, the park people will probably say, that's not right. And maybe shoot him away. But it's the gathering places, and they continue to be incredibly important as gathering places. They're also places where we're starting to recognise what is and what belongs in New Zealand. We've got the Koru here representing New Zealand. When we had, for example, the Christchurch Gardens, they are built on important ealing beds that were used by the Maori long before the settlers came for hunting and for gathering. It's recognising what is important here, and if you go to Sydney Botanic Gardens, there are now signs and recognition of the Aboriginal people and the fact that it was indeed their land. And we're starting to do that and not just see our botanic gardens as bringing in the best of the foreign. They're now also showing the best of what is in New Zealand and what is it that we have, and how do New Zealanders represent their own culture in art. But some things stay the same. This scene probably isn't very, very different to what you had in 1860. This garden has, I've said it before, stood the test of time. What is it, though, that makes this garden function so well? It's flexible, it's high quality, it's in the right place, it's in the middle, it's almost in the middle of the city. It's open, it's incredibly well designed, it's got variety, it's got places to be quiet, it's got places to be public, it's got places for performance, it's got places at the Locklock Books for quiet walks. It's got all of it in one very, very incredibly designed garden. But this is no accident. The fact that we have the Botanic Gardens today is because there's something in there that we value, and there would be a complete outcry. Imagine if somebody tried to get rid of the Botanic Gardens now, what would happen? But that's not, but others aren't so fortunate. If we look at Dunedin, many of the buildings from the 1800s, many of the things we've got have gone. The exchange has gone. Tell me if I'm getting the buildings right. The Century Theatre, that's gone and just left a whole, it's a car park now, isn't it? The Dunedin Hospital has gone. It's so much prettier than the current one. Well, you probably wouldn't want to go there if you were sick. We've got the trams. Sorry, cable cars.
We lost the trains too.
Have the trams, cable cars. They're gone. We have the Star Fountain, not from the 1860s. But that makes us think, why is it that these were lost for the Botanic Gardens? It doesn't. It remains almost entirely the same. And even if we look at the buildings in the Botanic Gardens, the Band Rotunda, this is at the turn of the century, it's not very clear, but you see the ladies in their sort of Victorian dress there, sitting there very... They're certainly not lolling about on the grass, are they? That scene, isn't that dissimilar to if we went there today? The others have gone, but this has remained. And it remains in use today. On a weekly basis, there's always people there. It's a phenomenally successful park of Botanic Gardens. And when it was built in the 1860s, I don't think they could have known that it would be equally well used today. Botanic Gardens and parks are just absolutely wonderful, and we're blessed with an enormous variety of them in New Zealand. And I think that what they did at the 1919 Town Country exhibition, where they said they didn't want the conditions of the motherland, I think they've been very successful in it. And at that point I'll say thank you very much for listening.